Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
Hey everybody, this is Monica Perez here with Tommy Salmons and Courtenay Turner. We are doing a real swapcast, honest to goodness, equally hosting, bringing our ideas. My show is Deep Dives with Monica Perez. You can find me at Monica Perez Show, and let's just go around the horn. Tommy, what's your show? Where can people find you?
Year Zero at the Libertarian Institute. That's libertarianinstitute.org/year-0/. And
Courtenay?
And I'm the Courtenay Turner podcast. And I'm everywhere except YouTube.
Yes, right. That's a badge of honor.
Yeah, right.
So what we want to talk about today is I think we want to kind of exchange ideas and just talk through some of the craziness that's happening with, there's like a whole new alphabet soup of DEI and ESG and CRT. There's stuff that I never want to get dragged into the culture wars. I hate it. And even now at this point, they've pushed me so far that I'm just like, I don't care if what I say sounds un-PC. Like if they've driven me to this, they mean to. They're going too far on purpose, in my opinion. So but I think you guys are way better, more articulate about this. And I did a little homework. I guess, can we all agree that this is rooted in cultural Marxism, or am I not even right about that?
Yeah. I would say that cultural Marxism was kind of the promulgator. I think this goes back really, really far. I would say occultists, Plato, Neoplatonists. Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of the tactics are dialectics. So,
all right.
Yeah. But cultural Marxists are a really good place to start because they are the ones who really took it into, as the name would have it, through the culture and the long march through the institution. So I think they're very relevant for sure.
This is what I think happened, and this will launch the conversation. We'll probably keep going until it's over. This is what I think happened, and tell me if I'm wrong. Marxism, either they say it did not work. I think maybe it would have worked and that cultural Marxism was put in place to thwart it. But the official story basically is that Marxism, as this idea of the haves on the top and the have-nots on the bottom, or the elite and the proles, whatever, that the workers of the world would unite and they would overcome their national distinctions to replace the hierarchy through revolution. They would take the place. When that did not work, and the official story is that it didn't work because people were kind of more interested in their nationalities than in their class as a unifying factor, and we're not going to break through that then cultural Marxism came in and basically replaced, at least in this country, as it was adapted here, say whiteness and non-whiteness for have and have not. And the same idea applies, that there should be a revolution to flip that. And from there, I just want to say, do you think that's right or wrong? And how do we, what were they really after? Were these people really after just having a power base that they didn't have access to when there was an establishment in place? There it is. That's the whole thing. Okay. And you have 90 minutes.
90 minutes.
I think it's partially right.
How would you synthesize, simplify it?
Okay. Well, the thing about the working class that people underestimate is their ambition. People work to get ahead. They don't work to maintain. So just take my job, for instance. I work with guys that are in their 30s and some in their 60s that are making $15, $16 an hour doing working out in the summer heat. The harder things get, they don't talk about attacking or revolting. That's not the way the talk goes. They start talking about, I need to start a business. I need to start hustling on the side. I need to start doing this. I need to start doing that. And they start looking at side hustles that they can get involved in. Right. And so that's where communism really underestimated the working class. They did not understand the mentality of a working man and the way that the working man is wired. The working man works. That's what they do. They don't revolt. They work. They work to put food on the table, and they just do whatever they have to do to make it to operate.
Do you think patriotism or loyalty plays a part at all in like, hey, I'm working for the national good. I'm not jealous of my boss. We're all Americans, like 100 years ago or whatever, whenever these ideas came. Do you think that their nationality or nationalism or ethnicity or any of that had anything to do with people's loyalties? I think tribe is more relevant, like the tribe that you're involved in. See, because like you got to think back during like the Bolshevik Revolution, let's just say that was like the extended family units, right? You had generations living together. That was a tribe of people living in a household or in a community. And they were working for that, obviously. I honestly think patriotism, as far as like nationalism, is actually fairly new. I think people were but
really
tribalism is not.
Right. I think nationalism, the way we understand it, is fairly new. It's a fairly new concept. Okay.
So before we get ahead, I want to go back to Courtenay and say, like, why would you say that what I said was partly true?
Partly correct. So we'll start with you're talking about like why these revolutions didn't spread, and that's actually the question that Lenin asked. Because according to Marx, it was supposed to spread throughout the West, and when that didn't happen, he was pretty frantic and very confused. He actually had a meeting with Antonio Gramsci.
Really?
Yeah, with George.
So Antonio Gramsci is the Italian who kind of came up with this approach, and Mussolini put him in jail because it was so dangerous. Right?
Exactly. Okay. Yes.
So he was actually interacting with Lenin.
Yes. And I wasn't there. I can't confirm this, but I found this in, to be fair, but because a lot of, bibliographers and a lot of historians don't reference the meeting, but, Gramsci's Gramsci's grandson wrote a bunch of memoirs, read through his letters. And,
I accept that. Yeah.
That
sounds like
and
real
so
to me.
he said they had this private meeting, and it was a private meeting. And I'm pretty sure that there was a meeting in Vienna with George. I don't know how you pronounce his name. He's Hungarian. It's like
Lukács. Lukács is Lukács.
Yeah. I don't know if the Y is silent or not.
I learned it in college from some like Hungarian guy, and he's like everyone pronounces Lukács. So every time I hear it, I'm like, it's Lukács.
It's Lukács, exactly.
Like goulash.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah.
Okay.
And I believe Horkheimer was the other one.
Horkheimer was the head of the Frankfurt School.
He didn't make it over until 6-7 years later.
So Gramsci was talked to Lukács and Lenin and Horkheimer. Like all these people were in communication with each other. And were they still in the philosophizing stage, or were they in the planning stage?
So essentially what Gramsci said is that, Marx wrote he wrote the Communist Manifesto, and then he also wrote Das Kapital. So the Communist Manifesto was essentially talking about cultural revolutions. That was a large part of the Communist Manifesto. Interestingly enough, he actually denounced Communist Manifesto in favor of Das Kapital, which was a very feeble attempt at economic theory. But he wanted to be perceived as, an economist, that it was about economic revolution. And what Gramsci said is that, no, that was wrong, that it needs to be through the culture, and essentially that it has to be a cultural subversion in order to have it spread. And most of what happened with the Frankfurt School was that they deduced that it was essentially the Judeo-Christian culture that had to be deracinated in order for Marxist style revolution to occur, because you have to take away that value system in order to replace it with a statist type value system.
Were they that aware of what they were talking about, you think?
They were, yes. Right. I mean, these people all wrote like very long, drawn out essays and books. And yeah, so Gramsci was not involved in the Frankfurt School. He was in prison. But arguably Lukács and then later Horkheimer executed a lot of what, his plans and theory, probably more Lukács than Horkheimer. But Good start.
So do you feel that is the root of what we're seeing today? And what we're seeing today is a concerted effort at academics, politics, corporate stuff, the World Economic Forum, this DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then the ESG is environmental, social, and governance, and then the CRT is the critical race theory. There's also like the transgender stuff that's in, any kind of sexual stuff. Like I didn't even like it when the Catholic school my kids went to talks to them about abortion in 3rd grade. Like I don't like the sex stuff in little kids. So all of those things seem to me to be like of a piece, like they're all kind of coming from the same place. And it feels like it's a place where cultural media, stuff like that, the institutions are all being infiltrated with this particular style of thing that definitely taps into culture, definitely taps into racial differences and stuff. But to the extent that, like, say, it brings sexual stuff to kids that are too young to understand sex, that seems like undermining their psyches in a way. Like, is it intentionally destructive on a psychological basis, in your opinion? And does is that what we're talking? Is this all deriving from cultural Marxism or from those guys, you think?
So it's largely deriving from these guys. I as I said, I actually think this stuff predates them, but I think that they were largely instrumental in, propagating and promulgating it. And when you look at a lot of like the sexual perversity that you're essentially talking about, that stuff, I don't think it starts with them, but certainly, there was I would say that Marcuse was really instrumental in that. I would say Eros of Civilization. Freud was under Tavistock. Tavistock has a lot of overlap with the Frankfurt School. They actually were kind of like I think of them as like the mother of all think tanks, and they were very much, there was a lot of overlap between Tavistock, the Frankfurt School, and the Fabian Socialists. And a lot of these key players were parts of all three of them. So then there was Erich Fromm, who was, so he was also really instrumental in the Frankfurt School. And he drew very much from Freud's, polymorphous diversity. So did Marcuse.
Do you guys think that this stuff that they're doing comes from a place of loving the people and thinking this is good for society? And if it's not coming from a place where they think it's actually good for the people in society, how do you think they get their minds around the damage that it's going to do?
I don't really think that. I think their worldview is kind of inverted. So I think that a lot of this has much more to do with power and control than it really does with, love and concern. But, that the thing that I urge people to consider is that they really believe what they write. So they actually think that this is the way it should be.
But that these people have to be sacrificed. Eggs have to be broken.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
And Tommy, you agree with that? Do you think
absolutely.
they know the damage they're doing, or do they, is it because they don't care about individuals, only the collective? Because that would go to like the pandemic thing too. It's like, well, you're the one killing grandma. And it's like, well, grandmas have to be sacrificed,
It's utilitarian.
Well,
the greater good.
Yeah. I'm not as versed in communist literature as Courtenay is, but what I do read is I read a lot of the globalist, right? You and I I've talked about this in the past.
There's a lot of overlap.
There absolutely is. Yeah. And so like when you read like Charles Galton Darwin in The Next Million Years, and he talks about getting rid of fossil fuels. I mean, he just comes out and says, millions of people are going to have to die. It's just the way.
And why does he want to get rid of fossil fuels?
Well, for control, for power.
Right, because it's so egalitarian.
See, that's the thing about the globalists. That's different than the communists. They admit it's for power. They're very open about, this is just to move forward.
Their code word is control, right? It would be much easier to control 500 million people than 8 billion.
So, Courtenay, you said the greater good, but is it? See, that's the thing with these guys, the guys who came over. It was the Frankfurt School was in Frankfurt, and then they came over. They were, I guess, mostly Jewish, and during the Nazi era, they came to Colombia. And so it was then transplanted there. So it was in the US, and like the way they talk, like it sounds like when you read the original stuff, they seem like, nice backslapping guys. Like the stuff sounds like the true believer stuff that you are talking about. And it goes to, they do kind of say greater good. However, now we're talking about power and control. And you got to wonder if it goes back to like the Illuminati stuff with the French Revolution, where it's not really about the greater good necessarily. It's about the monarchy having power that could not be accessed by anybody else, and you have to get rid of that so that we can get that power.
Right.
Well, I would actually argue they think that is the greater good, because so you bring up like the Illuminati, the occultists, they're Gnosticists. And, really a lot of this is based on Hegel, who was actually an alchemist and a hermeticist. So they think, so it's an inverted kind of a philosophy or a religion, essentially. And actually, they talk about it as being a religion. They literally, I'll pull up the quotes, but they literally say that this is a religion and it needs to be executed with religious fervor. And it is this idea, Gnostic notion that they are going to be the gods. So because they know best, they know better for a young child, whether they should be a boy or a girl. And, the parents don't know, they know better. Big Pharma knows better for you than you and your doctor. So, the list goes on and on. But, those are
right. So it's pure elitism then at that point.
It's elitism. But so when they say, but they really believe it, they really think that they are, when I say for the greater good, it's because the plebeians couldn't possibly know best.
Well, here's make a decision for yourself. Yeah.
Here's what's like weird about this, and I hate to admit this, but when I had a radio show that was a call-in show. So I really had my finger on the pulse of like what people were saying, both the people who were like mad at me, people from other like groups, minority groups. It was in Atlanta, which was extremely diverse. Like there was critical mass in every possible subcategory, and they always totally supported me. And then like most people did, or we had intelligent conversations. Then when Trump came along, they just forgot about the Constitution and that. And now with like the pandemic, I'm in LA and like lockdown, and people are just idiots, complete moron, like old people, like get away from me, I'm gonna die. I'm like, lady, you're gonna die anyway. Like, you should let me visit. You're stupid. Like, this is crazy. Right. So now I'm like, maybe plebes are stupid.
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't say it that harshly. It's not my style to be rude, but I'm just trying to make a point. Like, and it really isn't a point that they're right. It's just a point that, like, for the first time ever, this is a personal observation, for the first time ever, I could always completely defend the rank and file, the us versus them, the us's of it, 100%. Like the way the Russian revolutionaries or the like anti-serf people or anti-slave are always like, we have the serf wisdom, like serfs are superior. Like I would always completely, my father's a truck driver. He was really smart. He was really good. I could defend him to my dying day. And I just kind of thought everybody was like that. And now I'm like, you know what? When I moved to Texas and people were just Republican and they were like, I'm voting for this because it's better for my wallet. And I was like, but Republicans are voting for the Bill of Rights. I mean, I'm not a Republican, but at least I thought like the opposite of Democrat was a Republican and Democrats were like against, you know what I mean? So like my worldview is changing as I see people easily duped and manipulated. Now, by these very people, they are, and maybe that's just too high a bar for like the human being to deal with. And maybe they are creating the reality that they believe in and that they don't respect us, therefore. But it seems like it takes a lot of effort to get a lot of psychology and sociology to be able to delude, 7 billion people. Like,
yeah. So they have, I think this is, it's such a web, right? It's a very intricate web. So you have all of these different departments. And what I really try to, stress to people is that you can't see outside of that, right? Like it's almost like you're one puzzle piece piece, right? So it's, in the intelligence departments, very, very rarely do they know what another department is working on. Mm-hmm. So some are
very
spooks.
Compartmentalized.
Yes.
Yeah, it's compartmentalized. So like some are spooks and they get kind of like an all, seeing eye, pun intended, but they get to kind of know what's going on between different departments, and that often gives them a very different perspective of what's going on. Oh my goodness, this is what we're doing. And yet you hear stories about this. So when you talk about like the elites and some of the things there, they have all these different compartments essentially. So like I was talking about Tavistock before, they do a lot of social science research, and they do essentially a lot of the beta testing. So one of the big things that came out of Tavistock was shell shock therapy. And that was under the guise of, researching soldiers and what happened to them, but it became weaponized as trauma-based mind control. And you see this, right? So, and then when you have like some of these philosophers, they're so seeped in and it's very myopic. They're, very seeped in their field of study. So they don't necessarily know what's going on outside of that. And so they've been indoctrinated, they've been conditioned, and in a very myopic paradigm.
Did you see that Tavistock made the news last week in that they had the only transgender clinic for children in Britain? And it's kept saying it's like being shut down, but actually it says they are going to replace it with a series of regional centers at specialist children's hospitals. So it's actually, they're like breaking it up to spread around. And Tavistock was, I believe, related to that Marianne Faithfull who went out with Mick Jagger, and she was a masoch, as in sadism and masochism. She was a masoch. And so like, if you really want to get into the tendrils of the sexual stuff, it seems like they do connect.
Oh yeah. They were like the forerunners of not of the movement. The movement really, the genesis are occult, although I would argue Tavistock has a lot
of hear that
roots there. The genesis of feminism really is occultism, but the Tavistock Institute, which arguably an argument could be made, is very connected to the occult, but they were instrumental in the propaganda to condition feminism. That's where a lot of like the ads that were and the desensitization and the women's liberation and the hypersexualization, a lot of that came out of the Tavistock Institute.
How is that a cult?
No, that's not a cult, but I'm saying that arguably they are connected to.
But what's the occult roots of what we're talking about? A little bit, like I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Give me like an example.
So I was saying the occult root. Well, it depends. So the occult root of feminism, or the occult roots of the occult roots of feminism go. Feminism. So. And they kind of have to pave the way for where we are now, the transgender and then the transhumanism, right? But it is this, they worship like the, hermaphroditic type of, right?
Yes.
Those are what they worship. So is
that Hermeticism? Is that That's not Hermes?
Yeah.
I always thought it was about Hermes.
Yeah. No, that's
is
where
Hermes the hermaphrodite?
That's where Hermes isn't, but that's where the term Hermeticism comes out of.
So the hermaphrodite was Hermes and Aphrodite had a baby, and it was a male who was like raped or something. Is that correct?
I don't know if they were raped.
Or like consumed, like there was some sexual thing, like it was
like how they became.
Yeah, so he became like the union of male and female.
Yes. I don't know the story of how he became.
I thought there was some, but I'm reaching.
No, you're probably right. I haven't read that since I was like 6 years old. I honestly don't.
Yeah, I don't remember. But well, if you were reading that, then you 6 years.
I was like really into,
yes.
I was really into like the Greek mythology when I was really little. Like when I first started reading, that was like what I read.
Is this even pagan, where we've got fertility goddesses or whatever? And is the idea?
So the idea behind it? So they're eugenicists, right? They want to depopulate, and they eventually want to control the rest. And so a huge part of the feminist movement was to decrease the population, right? Because you destroy the family, and so if you and that's part of why they created this whole women should be able to work so they can tax both parties, right? Both the men and the women. And now that you don't have somebody home with the children, so you're disrupting the family unit. This was the beginning of the erosion of what? And you can't right.
If you have the mammary glands and the uterus, I mean, you kind of have to be there. Like, you know, you're not having a baby while, you know, like that chick, they gave this like 7-month pregnant chick the reins at Yahoo. And I was like, she's probably going to need to take some time off, like right after, even just like an afternoon. So you better hope there's nothing going on. Yeah. Like, it just doesn't even make sense. And they try to act like there's no biological basis in sex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was also part of it too, was to create that perversion. You know, they're very much into, because then it takes away the family unit. You know, if you have all this perversity, essentially, then it's
an inversion, right? Also,
it's an inversion. Yeah. Yeah, but Tavistock was very instrumental in the propaganda for that, you know, convincing women that, you know, they should want things like birth control, that, you know, this was empowering for them, that things like even like voting. I mean, there was really a lot
bicycles. I've heard bicycles.
Yeah.
So, Tommy, do you agree with this assessment? Is this new to you? Because it's a little bit new to me. I didn't realize there were such...
Some of it is new, but I mean, this was kind of what I was getting at whenever I introduced the idea to y'all, that the long march through the institution started with the family. I mean, they were plotting the education. They were bringing in educational tools to get the kids, because they can't deal with innocence. So they have to destroy the innocence of children in order to get these children to be scarred and have this trauma, so that they are seeking out this psychiatric help and can basically be programmed into acting as good little soldiers. But that all starts with they realized shortly after taking over the schools that, okay, well, the father and mother, they spend a lot of time with their kids and they actually have conversations with their children. So we have to do something about this. We have to separate the parents from the children now. And so they ushered in the feminist movement. It started they started pushing the two families, two parents working in the home, which caused division. And then you ended up with a situation where they brought in no-fault divorce, right? And it just made it that much easier. Oh, I'm just unhappy for this week or this month or whatever. Let's not work on our marriage. Let's just split up. The irreconcilable differences, you know? And it's like, okay, that's kind of strange. Why would you do that? And
well, so keep going.
Oh, I was going to say they started bringing this stuff in, and then you were talking about the normies, the plebs, and how they acted during the COVID. Well, obviously, one of the biggest institutions that they infiltrated was the media, and they've been doing this for years.
Was the what? I'm sorry.
The media.
The media, yeah, that was a huge.
You know. You had Operation Mockingbird and all these things. And I always say, just because that particular operation ended doesn't mean they ended the, operating within the media. That doesn't make any sense to me. You know, they found an easy way to control the masses. And
they had infiltrated completely, I'm sure. Yeah. It's not that they stopped the operation, it was just completely. Anyway, finish, Tommy, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is why they go after like big names like Alex Jones and this and the other that are in the alternative media, or Courtenay. They just kick her off. They're like, nope. Can't hear from her anymore. She's having too much influence because she's bringing up too many questions, and so it's actually injuring their operation.
So just before we pull on that thread, I want to just hit on something that you said about the mental illness that arises in the kids from this stuff. And that goes to what I was saying earlier. Like, they're obviously not doing this out of the goodness of their own hearts, right? So, or they are and they think it's good. I think this points out that now I totally believe that mental illness is a feature and not a bug of all this stuff. I think that big pharma and stuff is moving into that. That's why there was that shooting in the subway. And they're like, okay, now we're having a cop, a social worker, and like clinicians who can diagnose the homeless in the subways and give them pills. Like, it's crazy. And just like the vaccines, they will pay, the government will pay for that. So they'll actually go out and find the patients, give them the thing, have them pay for it. So mental illness is part of it. Also, I read something that like 57% of women, prime age women, whatever, I think who identify as liberal have been diagnosed with a mental illness, like 18 to 34-year-olds, something like that. Like they are mentally ill. And if you ever tap into, I was talking to an internet privacy guy, and he said, if you had somebody else's internet or if you have a VPN, like the internet looks like a totally different place to you because it's not tailored to you. So like when I saw my daughter's Instagram or whatever, it was just like cats, bunnies, cats and cucumbers. And then it was a picture of a woman who looked like me, which looked like my daughter. And she had a sign that said, I'm 30, I have no kids, and I'm happier. And it was like, and it was a sign, like she wrote, like, why, what was that even an ad for? Like, it was nothing. Right. It was weird. And it was so like, I can see that they are targeting people for certain things. And I believe that mental illness, obviously foreseeable with lockdown. So all the things that they're saying are COVID related, all are lockdown related or like jab illnesses. So everything they're saying is policies and this other thing. So the mental illness is definitely something that they are after. And so I can say now that we can answer the previous question, which is, do they really think this is good for society? Or are they there for something else? They're obviously there to control, to have the power, and it can't be both. It's not. Well, they're not doing it for us. They're doing it
right. But so, like, you know, when I'm talking about the feminist movement, right? So they want that, like this, the woman just to be deceived, to think that she shouldn't have children, and you know that her career matters. I'm not saying that women shouldn't work, or you know, I brought up the voting, and you'd be surprised, women actually really didn't want to vote. That was they actually the statistics were largely against. They were not in favor of it. So this was a lot of propaganda.
Why? Why would they care either way? Like, why would they be opposed to it or not in favor?
They want to be involved. They're at home. They don't want to be.
They had a sense of responsibility. They were like, I don't want to have to get educated.
Right.
I don't know that they didn't want to have to get educated. I mean they're tending to that. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, it was tied with the draft too. The voting was actually back in the day. It was tied with the draft.
What do you mean?
They actually, if you had the right to vote, then you were eligible to be drafted.
But they didn't do that for women,
right?
That's what I'm saying. When they passed the 19th Amendment, they stopped that practice.
Wow, that's interesting, because I did always think that voting maybe should be tied to some sense of ownership.
It should.
You know, skin in the game, whether it's property, whether it's like you just can't be a net, you know, a welfare recipient or whatever, just because there's a conflict of interest there. Right. It's a moral hazard to have people vote who don't have to pay for the consequences of the votes.
Yeah. No,
Obama would say you have no skin in the game.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that, but when you say like that, is it for the greater good, or is it just? So they really do think, though, that they know best. And they think that if they were the way they want it designed, whether, you know, to reduce the population and to have, you know, a technocracy, they think that this is the better way because they think they're gods. I know it's a Gnostic thing. It is a Gnostic thing. It really is Gnosticism. That's really what this is.
Really? Even the Frankfurt School guys? Because Francis Bacon personifies Gnosticism. And they couldn't
But they're based on Marxism. They're based on Marxism. They're based on Hegel, who was based on Kant and Plato. And this is all Gnosticism. I mean, Hegel, as I said, is arguably much more of an alchemist. You know, but yeah, this is Gnosticism because that's what the foundation is. I mean, Marx wrote Odes to Satan. I have 2 books up there. He literally
wrote Odes to Satan?
Literally wrote Odes to Satan.
It feels satanic. Do you think he thought Satan was a person? Do the Gnostics think that Satan is an actual entity, or is it
Gnosticism? Gnosticism is a kind of a broader term. It has more to do with gnosis, is knowledge. It's to know. So it's the love of knowledge, but it's this idea that, you know, biblically speaking, would be the idea that man is limited, and therefore God has, you know, harmed him because they didn't endow him with all the the knowledge. And so they think that they can get knowledge of, esoteric knowledge, essentially. And that's where, the esoteric term comes from. So it's that, that higher knowledge that man typically is limited in. So but that's what they believe that they can achieve and that they should achieve.
They also believe it's an exclusive club and only some people are capable of knowing, like, and understanding the knowledge, and therefore they keep the knowledge under lock and key. This is where stuff like the Illuminati, the Jesuits, that's where that lineage comes from.
What is the story with I try to find stuff on the Vatican and the Jesuits as like part of the cabal. And some of it gets like a lot of the other stuff where it gets like too kooky. And I'm like, that can't be, so what is the real story there? Are they all interrelated, or what is the story in a nutshell of, and these things, I mean, you're bringing this up in this conversation. So obviously there are some connections.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at Operation Gladio. I mean, there's obviously.
I just read a book on that, and it was in my thing. Oh, this is so interesting.
I have a huge book right here.
This is what I was thinking about that, because Bergoglio, who's the Pope right now, supposedly, I think he drinks baby's blood, and I'm Catholic. And so here's the thing with that, though. He was. So the book I read was the CIA, the Vatican, and Gladio, something like that. It's the mafia, it was all that stuff. It was a real popular.
That's the one I got, yeah.
Yeah, it's just got a lot of secondary sources, which I don't like when you're talking about stuff like that. Like, I want the smoking guns, and I want to know if you have a smoking gun or not. Like, I don't like you referring me to Peter Dale Scott, who I like and would believe, but then I got to go find the book and see exactly what he said. I don't like it like that. But so that's why I'm like a little fuzzy on the story. But one thing that really came through there is the CIA, and this is like Gramsci, right? Was a communist in Italy. Apparently, the communism in Italy was the backdoor. I think people probably know that, the backdoor to communism in Europe. Like, that's where it was coming in, and that's why Gramsci was in jail, and that's why we did Gladio there. The CIA was there. It was using, supposedly, the story is, it was using mob money that was funneled through the Vatican banks, and then the story gets a little confused with other stuff. Like, there was the bank Ambrosiano, which was bamboozling the Vatican, from what I can tell. So there's a lot of different things going on there. But the bottom line was they were fighting communists. They were fighting communists, even to the extent they were cooperating with fascists. They were fighting communists. And then you've got the CIA in Latin America, who was working with, I think, Bergoglio and some of those people, because there were liberation theology or some like really profoundly grassroots, whether that, I think that was like a profoundly grassroots thing, to the point where one of the bishops was assassinated, who was a proponent of that they were in there, and the CIA was trying to keep that down. I think even Rockefeller might have gone in over the head of the CIA to put a lot of money in there for that. But when I looked at like Bergoglio and some of the other guys who were down there working supposedly in connection with the CIA, they were promoting socialism. And it occurred to me that socialism, which is really fascism, right? So like fascism is socialism more than it is communism. Communism is something a little bit different. But I know you're disagreeing with me, Courtenay. I'm going to let you say, let me just finish. The one thing I'm saying is that I think that they were allowing socialism because they were basically paying people off to not go full communist. And that kind of cure, like, because some of these guys, like, I think Adorno actually criticized Soviet communism, which again was not pure communism, but like Marxist communist economic stuff. I think Adorno's, like, some of these people, or Marcuse, who was an OSS guy, CIA guy himself, like, I feel like they come across as socialists, but when push comes to shove, I think maybe they're there to make sure there isn't a real communist upheaval.
Oh, interesting. No, I mean, they all argue about, their version of communism. Essentially, I mean, it all leads to communism. The socialism, as it keeps progressing, which is the intention. I mean, that's the dialectic. It always progresses. So it ends up being communism. And when you look at these, I really think this whole divide, with not to say that there aren't nuanced differences between communism and fascism, but I think a lot of the narratives that are put forth regarding fascism versus communism is really to try and paint fascism as this right-wing kind of ideology, which is false, actually. The only component that could be led to, that people could attach to being right wing is because of the corporate element of it. And so they think of that as like a capitalistic concept, but it's not, because it's a merger of the corporations and the government.
But it's also, I think of fascism as more like National Socialism as opposed to international socialism, which is more like what communism might be. And
so,
so
I mean, what we're seeing right now with is absolutely global, because the
Klaus Schwab's globalism is international fascism.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And even in this country, because a lot of our corporations are international.
And the socialism that they promote does two things, because they do promote socialism that does two things, like Obamacare, public transportation. It all makes sure that they can actually pay unlivable wages by subsidizing necessities, which is pretty bad. And it also keeps the people quiet and dependent and all that. So
call socialism fascism. I don't think that those two
it's called National Socialism, right? I mean, isn't that what Nazis are?
Right, but fascism is not synonymous with nationalism.
Okay, so what is communism? Define communism.
Communism is, it's in theory, it's never actually happened though, right? I mean, it always it's some sort of totalitarianism, right? So, there's I think the difference between socialism and communism is that socialism, they think that, you still have some elements of where there's not complete takeover. So
you would say, do you think communism, because the way I think of communism, like Marxism, the way I learned it in college, was that capitalism builds up industry and then the factories basically run themselves. And that's when you can kill all the leaders. And then you all just show up for work in your right position and you give to, you contribute what you can, you take what you need. And that's it. Is that what, when you say communism, is that what you're talking about? Because when you start talking about these intellectuals, they got something else in mind. So what do you mean when you say
communism? I mean, essentially it's that the private, it has to do with property. So I think that's really kind of the difference, because socialism applies more to labor as opposed to property ownership. And I think that would be the distinction. But the thing is that all of these thinkers that you get lost in, everyone has their nuanced way of looking at it. But ultimately, it's all kind of leads to the same place. It all leads to totalitarianism.
So what do you guys make of, it's very hard for me to crack the code on this because I'm very analytical, and these guys, it's such gobbledygook. The psychology, the sociology, all the nonsense that's in it. And I think it taps into, a lot of times I think psychology and sociology are they're used as tools so that people can deny their own motives and that they can justify. So like they'll say, I remember one of my sisters is liberal. And when I was growing up, she would say, I have 8 older brothers and sisters. And she was much older than I. And when I was growing up, she was just like, it's a myth that if you give people welfare, they don't want to work. Everybody wants to work because that's how they get their feelings of self-worth. And if they need welfare, you don't have to worry about them abusing that system. Okay. So that, and I'm not even arguing it. I'm just saying that is the worldview, right? So I, as a person who's very observant or black and white, or maybe I look through some lens, I don't know. But it seems to me that if you get stuff, like if you don't have to, I personally, like, I went into the jungle once, really deep in the jungle, like 5 hours into the jungle on a boat. Like they were like, don't land or they will like kill you. I was like, okay. So we went all the way deep into the jungle and we got there. The people were there still wearing like bark ponchos. And they were sitting there. Their teeth were completely worn down because all they did all day long was make like yucca or whatever, like something that makes you trip or drunk or whatever. And it's like, oh, everyone likes to just sit around and get high. Everyone in the whole world since the beginning of time, they just want to sit around and get high. I want to sit around and get high, but I can't because I have to clean my house. I have to take care of my kids, blah, 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 blah. But I really just want to sit around and get high, whatever high means to me. Right. So that's my observation. And then the people I know who have, stolen or whatever, or use the state funds, like they just want to get high. And I'm really not trying to oversimplify. I know it sounds bad, but I'm saying like, I look at psychology and sociology as a way to pretend like that 1 + 1 does not equal 2. Like it's just a way to pretend that. And all that gobbledygook kind of says the same thing. And, so where was I going? Why was I thinking of that? Because
I agree with you on that. I want to quickly clarify this though. It says the main difference that under communism, most property and economic resources are owned and controlled by the state rather than individual citizens. Under socialism, all citizens share in equally economic resources as allocated by democratically elected. So you all share, so it's allocated.
Yeah, I mean, you could say socialism is communism light. I think the point I was making is that they'll give you all this gobbledygook, but they don't really mean it. They're just saying it to justify this totally
It's never happened. It's never happened where it doesn't become like despotism. It's always become ruled by. But I wanted to address what you were saying about psychology and sociology. So I started college as a neuroscience major because I had written 2 85-page theses in high school on dream analysis. And so I was going to, continue my work that basically the Columbia Presbyterian laughed at me when I presented the study to them. And so they told me it would be statistically significant and I would get a Nobel Prize, but not to bother because they're going to take my idea and run with it. So that was my plan. But when I started the psych classes, I felt like I would have to lie to continue to take it because they were so overwrought with Marxism. And so my, theory at the time had been that psychology was really run by Marxists and, that it was created by Marxists, which I don't think is entirely false even now. But now that I've studied, the Tavistock Institute and most of psychology is derived from Tavistock. It was created by largely by Kurt Lewin, certainly Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Eric Fromm was a big,
and these guys, right? These names overlap. Adorno, Marcuse, like they were advocates of Freud, for example.
Oh, for sure. And there was a lot of overlap. And then Edward Bernays, who was known as the father of propaganda,
the nephew of Freud.
Double nephew of Freud.
And I believe the great uncle of the guy who founded Netflix.
Yep, that's right. Absolutely. But now that I've studied that, I'm like, I've kind of come to the conclusion that I think that that the field of psychology and most social sciences, essentially, but sociology, I think is a little bit different because it's more testing grounds. But I think that most social sciences were created for testing grounds but I think that psychology was created to be a secular solution to spiritual problems. And that's really what you see.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that, psychology is all bad or that it's never helped anyone. That's not what I'm saying.
I was coming on too strong with that too. Like I definitely know people have psychological issues. I believe that stat that more than half the people in any given group has mental illness diagnosis. I totally get that. I just think that when you're giving out money, incentives do actually matter, and that all this gobbledygook is meant to like deceive us into,
and I think
not seeing what's in front of our eyes.
Well, and I think a lot of it has also been created. So I think a lot of conditions have been created through, culture weaponization. So like one of the things that you asked about was why is the CIA so involved in the Cultural Revolution in the 60s? And, that's very intentional because as you start to study through the Frankfurt School, they were involved in, the German term would be Aufheben du Kultur. And, Aufheben is a very complicated word because it kind of means to keep while destroy. Like the translation is like to lift up while to tear down. So it's an oxymoron in itself.
Wow.
But you see that's exactly what you see because it's very deceptive. And it goes back to this notion of inversions. But that's exactly what happened because it is the dialectic. And Hegel would talk about the negative. So he's known for the Hegelian dialectic, but the thesis, antithesis, synthesis actually was Kant. Kant said that. And then Hegel created it was the abstract, negative, and then concrete. And abstract and concrete are kind of, it started with concrete. Yeah. are kind of different than what you would expect them to be. But abstract is like to abstract something, like an idea, and then you negate it. And then the concrete is essentially the synthesis of those ideas, because he was an idealist and an alchemist. So it was the hybridization of that, but through the world of ideas. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, let's hear from Tommy. I think you had a thought, and then I want to pull on some of those threads.
No, like what she just said a while ago about sociology and psychology being spiritual in its manifestation is exactly where H.G. Wells was coming from in The Open Conspiracy. So what he said was that you had to destroy religion's dependence on otherworldliness, and you had to get religion to depend on scientism and materialism in order to usher in a one world religion to control the culture, and therefore you would get the one world government, which is what you were talking about would be the international fascism, the globalization. All the globalists, and this is why the globalists, I think Wells wrote this in 1928, right around the same time that Gramsci was operating, right? So they were dependent on each other's literature because they were ultimately aiming at an international order. It was just who was going to be in charge of that international order. Was it going to be the fascist like H.G. Wells or Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley, or was it going to be the communists like Gramsci, socialists like Orwell, who was a Fabian?
Wow. Is it possible that sociology or all these competing ideas were really like what I think about the presidential stuff? Like, I think Ted Cruz and Donald Trump were there for the people who put them there to decide which one was going to work better. Like, they let you vote on it because they're like, well, whichever one you want, we can work with whatever. Like, but I really think it's that.
The CFR already decided who's going to be.
Yeah, no, they didn't decide who. They didn't care. They were like, well, Ted Cruz will like make religious right kind of, juice that.
The main concern for the globalists, whether it's communists or the fascist globalists, was to reduce man's understanding and dependence to other men, and to build like another Tower of Babel kind of situation, right?
They're definitely doing that.
Right. And so what they were trying to do, and this is what H.G. Wells is talking about. He's talking about, like, when you read The Open Conspiracy, he talks about reforming education. He talks about destroying institutions, destroying patriotism, destroying nationalism, destroying religions. But he starts it off and he spends 3 chapters basically talking about how to destroy religion and ushering in a new religion, because he understands that foundation is what is the most important. And so he wants to usher in scientism and materialism into the church. And you see it all around you. That's why I sent y'all that flyer of the drag queen being introduced to the church. There was a video I watched a while back. A drag queen was giving a communion, right? And so, yeah, at a Methodist church, it's Hope Methodist Church. You can go to their shop and you can buy like onesies for your child that is like talking about drag and trans and all this stuff. Like, it's just insane stuff. You're like, what does this have to do with religion at all? Well, it's the materialistic taking over the metaphysical. So they're trying to push out that metaphysical and just everybody focus on the materialism, the secularism, the science.
But not for themselves, right? Because the Gnostics think they are kind of God, right?
Well, they're trying to become God. Like Aleister Crowley never claimed to be God, but he thought he would get there eventually.
See, that whole gang, L. Ron Hubbard, a lot of those guys were connected to the OSS and stuff, and they were religions.
When you start looking at who the players were, it kind of points to these witchcraft type people.
Well, out here where I live is near like JPL and everything, and I guess Jack Parsons started that. I mean, I've read books about him. Yeah, he was the Rocket. He's like, played with rockets, and I think he blew up in some kind of weird rockety thing that maybe had occult significance. But I believe he was a Satanist, and I think he was in with those guys, and that's like the origin of space travel. And like, could it go even to that? So where they actually did think that they could access kind of other planets. And
Courtney and I just talked about this the other day. Saul Alinsky thanks Lucifer and rules for radicals.
He does.
It's like Alex Jones had this thing that he would always say, and he'd say, you don't have to believe all this stuff, but they believe it.
That's what I keep saying. I'm like, that was my point when I'm like, when you ask whether or not it's they care about the people, I'm like, that they really believe in what they're doing.
You really think that? Because sometimes I wonder if they do it for one of two reasons other than really believing it. One being to keep us scared and overwhelmed by their power, and the other reason being that within their circles, in order to maintain their hierarchy and have their cells or their bureaucracy, they have to convince like the lower 32 degrees that they have actual power, even if they don't.
I guess it depends on what you're asking if they believe. I mean, I think when it comes to do they believe that they should, infiltrate the culture, control the masses, that all of that. Yes,
do they believe in magic?
I think they do. I think they believe that the more power they're able to attain through fear and propaganda, the closer they become to God.
Yeah, I think so.
Or to becoming a God. Let's say becoming a God. Right. And in the Greek translation of I think it's Psalms 96:5, where it says all the gods of the nations are demons, right? They believe that they are in touch with these entities.
Yeah.
And it's part of what's put me back on track to in a more Christian direction, because I'm watching what's occurring and I'm saying, well, the prophecies pointed to this. Whenever I look at what's happening around me, I remember doing a study when I was 13 years old on the book of Revelation. And I'm like, this looks too familiar. And this has kind of put me over the last couple of years back into a position where it's like, okay, the Christians had something figured out. Like they knew something. And I'm really researching, I'm really studying, and I'm really trying to figure it out. It's one of those things. Whenever I looked and I saw, I've been in contact with an old youth pastor of mine from when I was a young kid, like 12, 13 years old. And I was talking to him today, and I was like, when I saw what was occurring and I started seeing it infiltrate the church, I realized the 12 years that I called myself agnostic, I was wrong.
Well, like, agnostic just means you're not sure, right? I mean, I'm a practicing Catholic, and I'm not 100% sure. Like, I'm going to have a conversation with someone who knows my name after I'm dead. Like, I'm not sure about that. I'm going with that because it's like the best possible outcome. And also, like, when you see the manifestation of evil, it's like, just like when they shove this stuff down your throat and you're just like, I'm reacting to this now. At this point, you're forcing me to react. You want me to react? I am reacting because you're going to keep pushing it until you get a rise out of me, and you got the rise. So now I'm just like, okay, well, obviously the only hope is God, right? So I'm going with God. What
I'm saying is I was wrong in the way I behaved. No matter what my mind tells me, I should have continued to act as if there were God.
And if you were honest,
and a lot of what
would have.
Pasquale's wager.
Yes, exactly.
There's a lot in that, and that's what I'm saying is like part of what is influencing the spirit of modern day is so many people act as if there isn't a God, even if they say there is.
It's Luciferian self-indulgence. It's where it's like, do what you want. And it's like, there's no reason not to. You actually have to talk yourself into that position. It's not natural, in my opinion. I think you have a moral imperative, and that love comes from a place of mutual benefit. And that's the human beings have just emerged to that's a very important tool in the wheelhouse. And that you have to like go out of your way to be like, oh, okay, I have Social Security, so I don't even have to be nice to my kids. Like, that's not natural. They had to put artificial things in place for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I had a couple of things, and maybe I can ask in one big question. So I'm looking at that alphabet soup: DEI, ESG, and CRT. So DEI is the diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG is environmental, social governance, CRT is the critical race theory. And both DEI does, it's like generally corporate, but now it's getting into academia and schools. And what they say is you must discriminate and redirect resources away from the privileged group into the unprivileged group to have this equity. And that, like, if you look at that as folding into CRT, which is critical race theory, where it says that idea, which is very cultural Marxism to me, where like, it's not about class, it's not about money, it's not about privilege, it's not about happiness. It's about this fundamental structure of society that is inherently racist. You're not even aware of it, so we cannot blame you, but we do need to basically like violently invert it. And then even ESG is a way to me to say to corporations, like, again, what you see is not what you get. And we have to put these structures in place to make you feel the pain of not doing what we want, even though just making widgets and selling widgets and using widgets is no longer enough. You know, it's kind of like a psychology or sociology put in the corporate world. So all of those things do seem to emerge from that cultural revolution thing. And I can't help but wonder, like, that looks like the realization of a long march, because those are all institutional infiltrations. And then you said that I wasn't wrong, or it's not untrue that the CIA in the 60s, for example, did have a hand in that. And, you know, is it because this is really like subsidizing capitalism or subsidizing Luciferians? Like, what do each of you think is the, you know, how do all those things fit together?
Oof. You want to go, Courtney?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, they have to lay the groundwork. So they can't just jump to, I think you're absolutely right that the Frankfurt School cultural Marxists really did lay the foundation to be able to get to where we're going now, and where we are now. Essentially the critical race theory is just another iteration. It's a critical theory. Race. Oh, right. Yeah, right. Critical course, theories, and now it's critical race theory. So it's just another iteration of critical theory. But, you know, they had to do critical theory first. You know, it's like I was saying before, they have to do feminism before they can do, then they went into the LGBTQ, and then they go into the trans, and now they're going into transhuman. You know, they have to lay all these steps. It's the Fabian socialism is, we call it incrementalism. That's essentially what it is.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask, wasn't the Fabian logo like a wolf in sheep's clothing?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was. And then it became the tortoise, you know, the incrementalism. But,
that's really funny. But how about the CIA? Why?
Why the CIA?
Yeah, the old CIA too. Like, you know,
because they were all Trotskyites.
They were Trotskyites.
Oh, because what you were saying earlier, like the spooks are different from the rank and file, like because CIA agents, FBI agents, like a lot of them, you know, I just remember.
Which is why they killed Kennedy.
Because
they killed Kennedy. I think. I mean,
because they were Trotskyites and he wasn't going along.
But I wasn't there, but I think a lot of why they killed Kennedy was to create a mass trauma-based,
right?
It's trauma-based mind control. So they did all this beta testing of specific individual trauma-based mind control, and then this was kind of a way to do a mass scale trauma-based mind control.
And the War of the Worlds was an experiment. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And it did really traumatize the nation.
Imagine H.G. Wells. I don't know why. Right? I don't know why I keep bringing him up.
That's so funny.
He was definitely in that circle, so he might have known. But I think too, I think it's absolutely this. It is the critical theory, and it is this. What I was saying is I wrote this article on critical race theory, I guess about 2 years ago now, and what I talked about is that they do replace the pecuniary class card with the race card because it's the same notion that Gramsci had, that it had to be done culturally, because in this country we have the part of what people pride America on is being able to have class mobility and have fiscal mobility, and so they knew that wasn't going to be a viable tension to stoke, and therefore they replaced this notion of oppressed versus oppressor with, the race card. It's the immutable race card, right? Because you have no control over it.
Yes, right.
But then they went a step further with the intersectionality, because now they have a carte blanche to have this umbrella type term that, and they're all essentially interchangeable and interconnected. So, it's now you have these different, and you would be, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you both know all of these, like there's like ableism and there's like, fatism. And I mean, it gets absurd, but there are all these protected classes who, of course, they're protected and therefore you have to take from the privileged. And this is the worst of it, is that with all of the DEI and with the SEL, this is what they're teaching to children. So
what's SEL, the sustainability goals? What are you saying?
Social emotional learning.
Oh, what is that?
It's what they changed CRT to whenever people found out that they were teaching CRT. They're like, no, we're not. We're teaching SEL.
So it's like ESG. It's like taking where the rubber hits the road out of the actual thing that you're talking about. So it's
I'll get to ESG in a second. I was going to let.
Yeah, ESG is a scam. I mean, it's a huge fraud.
No, it is. But I used to always say that like academia, politics, and the media are three things where they tell you what to do, what to think, and all of that. And the rubber never hits the road. Like if they don't get fired, it doesn't matter that they're wrong ever. But if you're in business, if you don't design the widget well, don't market it properly, if it doesn't work, you go out of business. And with the ESG thing, they're like removing that objectivity out of that as well by saying like, first of all, we're getting rid of, and the pandemic did this too, we're getting rid of all like individual businesses, all of that. And if you don't play this game, if you are not part of the club, you won't be, but if you do play the game, then you get to be a monopoly in your country for this product.
It's also just a Trojan horse for the global social credit system. I mean, that's essentially what the ESG is all about. With the march through the institutions, when you talk about the different institutions. So, Gramsci had about 5 of them, but there probably are somewhere around like 12 if you go through all of them. But the crux of all of them is education, because, and that's why they're targeting the kids so hard. They're just saying, we don't need your guns when we have your kids. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. And they go through the education because then they get all the institution. So if you think about it, right, like the legal system, that's an institution. How do you get to be a lawyer? You go to law school. The medical system, right? You have to go through years of school. You're educated so they can indoctrinate you and condition you. The media. To become a journalist, you have to go through an education, right? So all of these just different systems. I mean, even the family, John Dewey was pretty transparent about, why they created the public education system. And it really wasn't, it wasn't as benevolent as people might think, so
right. It wasn't.
It had a lot more to do with control and statism. So
it was almost like a forerunner of Common Core. His idea was to like take the content out, make sure you could think enough to work, but not to really like they deprive you of the liberal arts, which were the free man's arts. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It was to erode critical thinking. They wanted to teach you, what to think and as opposed to how to think. So, yeah. So I just want to say that education is kind of the fulcrum, if you will, of all of the institutions that they needed to infiltrate, because through that they can get to the others. Take away the ESG.
ESG is a garbled mess. If you like, I started reading on it in 2019. Trying to figure out like, what is this? And you had said it has to do with corporations. Actually, it has zero to do with corporations. It has everything to do with people. It has everything to do with the consumer. It's all about controlling your habits and where you get your products, right? So, and
they incentivize the corporations though. And then they do.
Right. I'm going to get to that. But the ultimate goal is not the corporations. It's you. All right, you're the target. In shaping the future of the fourth industrial revolution, Klaus Schwab says that the investors have the carrot to make the corporations move. All right, because corporations don't hold liquidity. They turn to investors for liquidity in order to finance their future products. All right, if you get the hedge funds, if you get the financial institutions picking and choosing.
Larry Fink, yeah.
Right. If you get them picking and choosing.
Stakeholder capitalism.
Right. Who they do business with, where they give loans, how they give those loans, and why they give those loans. And they come up with these arbitrary rules, ESG, in order to get those loans. Then they're forcing the corporations to act in specific ways. So you get the Gillette commercial. You get Coca-Cola, being all woke. You get Disney being all woke. Why? Because you only have so many products to choose from. You're addicted to Coca-Cola. You're addicted to Disney. You're addicted to these things. As they move the corporations, they move the culture. They move you because you're going with them because you have no other choice. There's nowhere else to go, right? So, yes, they are putting the lien on corporations in order to get the funding. But the reason they're doing that isn't to get the corporations, it's to get you to act the way they want you to act.
Which because is how?
Apparently.
Men suck and fossil fuels suck.
No, they've been talking about getting rid of fossil fuels since the 40s. Before the fossil fuel industry and before the gas industry lobbied DC, there were actually cars that ran on nothing but ethanol.
That was Ford's idea. I believe that was Ford's idea.
And James Corbett did an entire 2-series documentary, How Big Oil Conquered the World and Why Big Oil Conquered the World. I had him on. We talked about this. Really? And we talked about ESG specifically in this context. Because if you look at the CEO or the CFO of BP or Shell or ExxonMobil, they're all for sustainable development. BP goes around bragging that the increase in prices is helping them to diversify where they're getting energy from and how they're producing energy, right? So when you sit here and these people are like, the conservatives especially are bad about this. They want to group all oil into the same category. It's not the same category. What's happening with the oil companies right now is BP and Shell and ExxonMobil are on board with WEF and ESG. They're on board. They're in that camp.
Yeah.
And there's 10,000 leases. The Biden administration keeps saying, we've approved 10,000 leases, right? It's not BP, Shell, ExxonMobil that are having an issue getting funding. They're on board with the ESG. It's the drilling companies. They only process the oil. They do not drill the oil. There are companies like Halliburton and these small. Yeah, there are a lot of small. Right. There are a lot of smaller companies that do the drilling. They can't get the financing to operate on these leases because it's bad for the ESG score. They have a low ESG score, so therefore the financial institutions won't fund them.
So are you saying that the oil companies are fine with this because they get to sell less oil at much higher prices, and
because
or because they're moving into green, and green is going to be more oligopolistic even than oil, or what? Why does Exxon? They are fine with it. I agree with you, but why?
Green requires you to own the land. It's a land grab. Look at what Bill Gates just did. He just bought 242,000 acres of farmland. BlackRock's going around buying real estate all over the place. These oil companies, they don't want to lease the resources from you. They want to own the land because land only increases in value. You can't have a wind farm or a solar farm without owning the property. You can't do it. You have to own that land. Someone has to own it. If you're renting that land from a person, like a billboard, let's say, if I were to try to sell a piece of my property to put a billboard up, that company that puts that billboard up on my property is going to pay me $250 a month just for that small spot. You're talking about 8 inches, 10 inches in diameter.
I see what you're saying.
Right?
Like even an oil drill,
they can't afford
a small footprint.
Just one spot, but a solar field or a wind farm.
Those wind farms, they're hideous. I see them.
Huge. Oh yeah. Yeah, they're all over California. I think they're the only thing that keeps California attached to the United States. But
maybe
so,
it's a shame. I mean, I want to get out. I want to be on the last chopper out of Saigon, but I do think that
I took the last plane out of Saigon in September.
Did you? Oh my gosh, I want to get back to Texas, and I'm a Yankee, and I'm still we could not get south enough.
We would be happy to have you.
Thank you. It will happen. It's definitely happening. But as a podcasting, it really, despite what people may think, it is not enough to run a household on the. Right. It's barely enough to run a podcast on what you get.
That's true. Yeah.
Yes, that's why I was sweaty when I got here this evening.
Yeah, exactly. Because everybody has a real job. So, all right. So let's kind of bring it home. Like, what's the takeaway? Are you guys totally black pilled about this stuff? I mean, do you think people are waking up? Like, and don't worry, you won't have to end on a hopeful note, but what's the bottom line? Are they misjudging the true nature of man because they're so removed from it? What's the
Can
story?
I give one white pill about the ESG stuff real quick?
Go for it. Great. Yeah.
So Peter Thiel, everybody's focusing on Elon Musk and this whole Twitter nonsense that's going on. That's not the real fight that's happening. Okay. The real fight that's happening is Peter Thiel is financing a ton of financial institutions. He just started one with a guy. The guy's like Indian or something. I can't pronounce his name. So I'm not even going to try, but it's called Strive. The whole purpose of this was to compete with BlackRock. All right.
Really?
So there are people out there that are.
What?
Oh, you think Peter Thiel is legit?
I think so, just from what I'm watching his moves. Now, here's what I'll say about what I mean by legit.
Monica and I are like,
no, like here, I do actually have like parenthetical here, because what I think you're witnessing, and here's what I think you're witnessing when it comes to like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and a Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. I think we're witnessing the different factions of globalization. Like we were just talking about the communist globalist and the fascist globalist, right? I think you're witnessing a couple of different factions of globalization. You have the more modern globalist, which would be like your Bill Gates and your Klaus Schwabs. They're kind of like the old guard. You have the new guard. Well, the new guard doesn't really have power, right? They have money, but they don't have any power. The power is still sitting in that old guard with the Klaus Schwabs. It's why we keep getting 90-year-old fucking presidents, because that's where all of the power is residing. It's still residing in those people, the Hans-Jörg Wyss, and
there is something to the olds. They just won't. And Elliot Abrams.
They just won't let it go. That's why you couldn't kill grandma, because who's going to run for president?
Kissinger is still alive.
I know.
I'm like calling shots.
But they're still right. And I almost wonder if they're just propping them up there while the other guys can incubate. The guy's name is Vivek Ramaswamy. Just so you know.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go. So
I'm never saying that.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's nice. It's got a rhythm. I think it's fun to say Vivek Ramaswamy. So, but Courtenay, you're on my page. We're like, I mean, only if you see where Peter Thiel got his money from, like that's always a big tell. But
probably
like,
InQtel,
and yeah, I think it was InQtel, which is the CIA venture capital thing. But Courtenay, why were you like screwing up your face at Tommy for thinking Peter Thiel might be for real?
Yeah, well, for that reason. I mean, I don't trust him at all.
Yeah, there's no chance, chance in the world.
Well, I trust him fighting the WEF, which is where all the power resides right now.
More to Tommy's point, though, I think is something that I've been considering lately, and I'm interested in what Courtenay has to say, is that it is possible. I mean, I was so completely like everything's all sewn up, especially with lockdown, like the entire world locked down except for like Belarus. And but But Belarus did not lock down. But Putin had a vaccine. But like maybe it was water. Like I don't know. Putin's like actually fighting in Ukraine now. But maybe we just needed another war because Afghanistan just like got too old. Like I don't know. But it's possible that is a real fight. Or like Giuliani went over to Ukraine to like dip his beak, and they were just like, "Get the fuck out of here! This is for Democrats." Like remember? And so there could be. I'm still wondering if there are two parties. Like, I don't think so. But at a certain level, like, I have to wonder, is everyone sitting at the same table and just laughing their asses off that we think that like Putin and Biden don't like smoke cigars together? Like, what is the real deal there? Because you can have two evils who offset each other, and that's actually a white pill right there because nobody's going to get anywhere. That's great.
That's
like, I love deadlock in Washington. They're like deadlock in Washington. I'm like, yay, deadlock in Washington,
Well, I think a really good example of that is actually you talked about like, fascism and communism, right? It's not that Hitler was so opposed to fascism. It's that he wanted to be in power. So, he didn't want Mussolini taking the power. He wanted to rule the world.
And Stalin, and he tried to work it out. And then they couldn't. Not enough room for both of them.
Exactly.
Do you think that's still possible?
So I absolutely do. So I always say it was a war, it was a competition of men, not of ideology, really. Because, Hitler came from the socialist, sorry, I can't speak, socialist, ideology. That's where he came out of. So, yeah. But I think that's absolutely going on right now. I think that I think good example would be like China. So we essentially put China in power.
That's another Corbett documentary.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Rockefellers in China.
Apparently, I need to, catch up on
James
Corbett.
Yeah, you should definitely his like stuff he works hard on.
He's awesome.
Just incomparable.
Okay, yeah. So I have more.
He's hard to get on your show though because he's always working on a new documentary.
Yeah,
okay.
Good.
It took me like 2 or 3 months. Like we scheduled like two or 3 months ahead of time. Just to make sure that he could get on.
I have the next 2 months pretty booked. So,
but no, just watch the documentaries. That's definitely his highest.
Yeah, no, I'll start with that for sure.
Yeah. For sure. Those two, I would say, are absolutely you must watch it.
Okay,
Oil and China.
Okay, yeah. So I think China
so
is.
You're saying China?
We put them in power, and then now I think they kind of feel like they might have enough power and they want more, right? So
yes, that's what I think. It's like, or the alternative is, I just thought of this recently, perhaps when the Rockefellers went in there to like, maybe the Rockefellers were reading the tea leaves and they actually said out loud, we have to slow down the West and prop up the East if we're going to have that merger so we can have world government. There is a chance, though, that they saw, and maybe these things are both true at the same time, that they saw the inevitable power of China once, like, they discovered electricity. Like, you're going to have 1 billion people who work hard and are smarter than you, and then when you plug them in, you have no chance. So maybe Biden and Rockefeller are there, like, smoking cigars with those guys saying, fuck America. Like, come on, you and me, we got this thing. So, and it could be that China, just like JFK to Ronald Reagan and Nixon and these guys who were kind of, they were deep state guys or whatever. They were connected. They knew how it worked. But then they were just like, hey, I'm a man. I have ideas and I'm the president. And they were just like, oh, another one who thinks he's the president. So it's possible.
I think it is possible. I think that, I think the global elites use China as a model. And that's, so China.
Definitely.
They think China is the pawn, but I think China thinks that, they possibly could be a contender at the table.
Yeah, so, they are holding the gun. Like, they could use it.
Right.
Like they don't.
I think that's what they think. I don't know how factual it is. I think
but there's
China's
probably factions in there too. Like,
China is one place I would say it's not just that. I don't think China is as powerful as they would like everyone else to believe. So I don't know how viable it is. That doesn't mean that they're not vying for power. They don't want to. So the same thing with Russia. So I think we got with Putin is a very interesting thing because in some ways I think he really is fighting the New World Order.
Right.
what didn't Jacob Rothschild say that the single largest threat to the New World Order is Vladimir Putin? So,
wow.
I mean, I've heard people say that that's
it's possible. Definitely possible.
Well, I've heard people say that's a disinfo campaign. I actually am, and I don't know, but I'm inclined to actually believe it based on results. So,
well, that's the thing. Like, we're looking at it, and you have to actually identify. Like, it's like calling everybody Fed. We're all Feds. It's like, well, okay, why do you think that? Like, give me some actual reasons.
But I don't. What I think is that he is in a lot of ways culturally fighting the New World Order. That doesn't make him an ally, because I think his intention is to take care of Russia. He wants the
for himself,
the global Russia.
His power is in the Russian people, and the Russian people benefit from people playing by the rules, because the guys who aren't playing by the rules have the advantage. So if you're like, hey, slow down, you've got to like be fair. It's like, well, that's obviously in your advantage, but if you were on top, you would probably, whatever. So I totally agree. It doesn't mean he's virtuous. It doesn't mean he's on our side, but I would like it if we played fair.
That's exactly my view of Peter Thiel. Like, he's fighting the worst threat right now, but he's doing it for his own reasons. He's not doing it for us. Like, I would never act as if I thought he was going to do it. He was doing it for me or for you or for our wealth or our well-being. He's fighting the worst threat at the moment, which is the WEF in this. And see, what H.G. Wells said in The Open Conspiracy, he said you have to destroy the patriotism, the nationalism, these institutions. And some people think it's going to be one of the nation states that rises up to be that global power and to be that global government. But it's not. And that's a very, how did he put it? He said it was a very naive thing to think that the government that we see rise up as a global power will look anything like what we think of when we think of a nation state.
I have to. We're even going over 90 minutes, and I know Courtney has something to say, but can I say two quick things, Courtney, first? Yes. Okay, so here are the two things, is that I was watching a movie on Netflix called Six Underground, starring Ryan Reynolds, and it was about a billionaire who was saving some country from its own leader, and then he's like, they were setting it up for like sequels, looked like to me, but he's, like another Batman kind of thing, like people thought Trump was, like billionaire by day, but superhero by night, but this guy had an international thing. He was enforcing democracy like in different countries as an international player. And then also in one of those 2010 Rockefeller Foundation, that document that had 4 scenarios in it about the technological future.
Where Lockstep was,
Yes. So there, and Hack Attack was another one of them. In one of those, and I actually think Lockstep, although it bore a lot to the lockdown and stuff, Hack Attack actually I thought was closer to what really happened. And I think that one,
it was both.
Yeah. Yes. Right. It was a mixture for sure. One of the things it said there, and I think it might have been in the Hack Attack one, which was the degeneration, the degradation of the nation state will lead to not a world government in this case, but in big philanthropy being the de facto world government. So these are different visions, Tommy. Like what you're saying, that's excellent. Is like these are different visions of the post-national competitive landscape in the world, a
and that's what I think Peter Thiel is doing. That's what I think Peter Thiel is. I think he's a competitor that and doesn't have the power or influence to hurt us at this moment.
I don't know. I saw Travis Kalanick try to keep the government from surveilling like Uber riders, and they killed his mother, in my opinion. So I don't think any individual is really going to be able to break out. But sorry, Courtney, I keep stepping on you.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. But I was going to say two things. One, in terms of like the competition, I mean, Soros is actually, he has a very different vision than like the World Economic Forum and the globalist, he's a Karl Popper guy, just like I think Adorno. Exactly. Open societies, that's his whole, which is kind of the opposite actually of what like the World Economic Forum and so he, in a way, they align. It's kind of like the, like the radical Islamic, they align with the communists.
It's just like any game. Like you get rid of
they have a common enemy. So
if you watch Cutthroat Kitchen or whatever it's called, like you always take out the weak guy first. You don't like go for the strong guy. It's like take out the weak guy first. I'll worry about you later.
Yeah, exactly.
And what was the second thing you were going to say?
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that a lot of the documents and yes, it was the scenarios for future technologies, something like that, right? The Rockefeller Foundation document,
written by an Esalen guy, by the way.
It was, yeah, it was. That's right. I think that there's several other documents, and they all say. Jacques Attali was one of them, but they talk about how and Agenda 2130 talks about this too, that, they don't want, there won't be any nation states. Like essentially by 2030, they would like the collapse of the United States. And then by 2050, that there will be no nation states. It will be like power blocks. What?
That I need to see. I haven't seen that one.
That there will be
and that's me. I'd love to put it in the show.
I will. That there's like power blocks, but not nation states anymore. And those are their plans. I'm not saying they're going to happen.
No, that makes sense, because the North American Union was one of those that they said, the CFR said, like, this is how we align all their
and they tried with the North America, union that they were trying to do also.
Okay, so we got to wrap because we could just keep going forever.
We haven't even got to the philanthropy yet.
Well, we'll have to do that next time, unless you can do it in like 2.5 minutes. And
I can't. There's a lot.
All right, let's do it next time. Wow, this was really, really fun. Really fun. So thank you so much. And I would have thought we'd have to do it in the morning Courtenay is absolutely sharp as a tack. I usually drive people to drink by this hour. And then all my podcasts are drunken, and people listen to them in the morning and they're just like, why is everybody drunk? It's like, well, I think it was after work, but anyway, so you really brought it, and I appreciate that. So let's just go around the horn. I'm Monica Perez from Deep Dives with Monica Perez. You can also tweet at me at Monica Perez Show, and my new URL is monicasdeepdives.com. So let's go around. Courtenay, go ahead. Remind people how they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm Courtenay Turner, and I spell my name like Courtenay. So it's Courtenay, and it's the Courtenay Turner podcast. And I am pretty much everywhere that you can find podcasts except for YouTube. And my website, it should be out hopefully next week. And it's just CourtenayTurner.com. And then I'm on Twitter at Courtenay Turner. I'm on Instagram at Kinetic Quartz. So
excellent. And Tommy.
Yes, I'm Tommy Salmons, the host of the Year Zero podcast. I can also be found everywhere you can find podcasts, and even YouTube, though I don't do video for my podcast. It's audio only, so you just get to look at my logo. But I prefer you go to libertarianinstitute.org/year-0/ and pick it up there, because then Scott knows I'm actually doing the work.
Okay. Yep. Wow, guys. That was super, super fun. I really appreciate it. Thanks for putting it together, Tommy. Thanks for bringing your all, Courtenay, or maybe it's not your all. Maybe it's
definitely not
one load tied behind your head. Like, oh, wow. Like there's so much more. And there you go. Well, hopefully we'll tap into so much more next time.
Yeah. Let's do it.
All righty.
If you're gonna play this game of pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting reelected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the views that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names, on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedom. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our